Animal Protective Services has so many animals up for adoption, the price of all adoptions is cut in half for the rest of the month. The shelter posted on social media it is at maximum capacity and doesn't have any kennels available. Staff would like help from fosters, adopters, and 501c3 rescue groups. Until the end of the month, the price to adopt a dog is now $67.50. The price to adopt cats ranges between $27 and $37. Adoptions include a spay or neuter voucher and a rabies vaccine. Dog adoptions also include dewormer and a vaccine against parvovirus and bordetella. For more on these stories, you can head over to wwaytv3.com. I'm Matt Bennett. Have a great day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm WWAY meteorologist Ramel Carpenter with your Storm Track 3 forecast. Get ready for the hottest day of the week as our high temperatures climb into the middle and perhaps the upper 90s away from the coast. Coastal areas will be toasty as well, getting into the upper 80s with a low-end risk for rip currents this afternoon for eastern and southern-facing beaches. Only a small chance for showers and storms to develop later this evening. Most backyards will stay dry, but we're remaining warm and muggy overnight as our temperatures fall to the middle 70s. Get your full forecast on WWAY and WWAYTV3.com.
This news and weather is brought to you by Two Men and a Truck. For your free quote, go to twomenandatruck.com. twomenandatruck.com.
The Wilmington Cape Fear Home Builders Association serves as the advocate for the building industry, advancing professionalism and promoting community involvement. We are a positive force for responsible growth while protecting property rights and the privilege of home ownership. 3 out of every 5 jobs is touched in some manner by construction in our region. Growth generates jobs, maintains our property values, and builds and updates our infrastructure. Join us Friday mornings for the Construction Connection with the Wilmington Cape Fear Home Builders Association and the Big Talker FM.
O'Leary's Automotive Repair has multiple locations in the area in Hampstead, Leland, the Myrtle Grove area, Ogden, and Wrightsboro. O'Leary's Automotive Repair, a trusted, locally owned business since 2006.
Hi, this is Justin Humphreys from the Humphreys Law Firm on Eastwood Road. The Humphreys Law Firm is located in Lumina Station, Wilmington, North Carolina, practices civil litigation, intellectual property, commercial, and residential real estate. Please give us a call at 910-332-0721 or visit us on our website, which is www.humphreysfirm.law. You can also listen to me every Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m. on the Big Talker 106.7 FM.
Hey, welcome back to the Asylum, your refuge in a world gone mad, right here on the Big Talker. Big Talker Network, bigtalker.live is the website. Download the app for Android and iOS devices. You can Bluetooth it with your car's entertainment system. Take the Big Talker anywhere and everywhere you want to go. And don't forget to hit the email link and send us any comments, questions, concerns, critiques, or compliments you may have, because we cannot improve without your help. That's right. That's why we are the Asylum, the Big Talker Network. Boy, it went quiet. The music was cool, and then it went away, and then, man. Whew. All right, Wednesday. Great show last night with All Things Brunswick out of Bolivia, North Carolina. Remote by remote. Absolute, it's almost a fight broke out. That was kind of cool. But they've been doing the pro and con thing, which not a lot of people do. Right? They bring on one side, not the other. Well, here last week, they had a couple of people from the Wind Coalition encouraging people to support wind farms. And then last night was more the rebuttal to that as to why we don't want wind farms. I don't think they actually addressed why we don't need them. Everything in their argument was mostly emotional and such. I don't know if anyone can dictate the subjective nature of what one person may or may not enjoy. So by trying to dictate what I might enjoy, like, do you really want to see a bunch of... I don't think I would be too terribly bothered by it, right? And just like any other so many of the arguments were again, emotional and subjective in nature. The only one that had a bearing, I thought, from last night's discussion was how it interferes with GPS and radar. Okay, I don't think it interferes with GPS. GPS are RF signals that come through the air. They are not bothered by carbon fiber. However, the sonar, the radar, the bits that bounce off of objects in front of you, again, I don't think that we're looking at an interference so much, right? I think what's actually going to happen is it's going to protect you from hitting things. I mean, that's why we have it. But the GPS navigation is actually using, overhead signals. It has nothing to do with, it's RF. So if your GPS is being interfered with by a windmill, carbon fiber windmill, then chances are you need to look into getting a new radar sonar system or new GPS system. Other issues, like how much oil and gas and you're going to drip into the water. Okay, so lubrication is any number of forms, including graphite, right? That's a dry lubricant. Believe it or not, vegetable oil is also a lubricant, but it is not harmful to the environment. In fact, there are a number of lubricants that are in use. I don't know how much water soluble is as much of an issue as being non-toxic. Being an inert, like a rock, right? A rock isn't poisonous. It's not a wonderful thing. It's not a bad thing. It just is a thing. There are lots of rocks in the water and they don't cause a problem. So it's very possible that there have been and will be developed lubricants that are pretty much inert in all they do, and you don't need a lot of it. It's keep the wheels, the machine rolling. And then the discussion about the hurricane and how it's going to snap. No, that man don't know, y'all ain't don't know what they're doing, man. So, because I am curious and I'm very much interested in alternative energy from a scientific and engineering point of view, looking into these things, they should have a base with a clutch, right? And if you disengage the clutch, no matter how high the winds are, the turbine will weather vane itself into the wind to minimize its profile to the wind. That's why everything's round. And then they do what's called feathering the blades, which is what they do in an airplane, right? If you're in a twin-engine aircraft and you lose an engine, you will feather the prop so that it does not produce any drag. So the other engine can fly more efficiently and it's not pushing against an engine that's, blocking the wind. You can also feather the props to more effectively bite the air to pull your aircraft through the air. So, in the case of a turbine, those two components are fundamental to keeping this thing upright because it's expensive. They don't want to be replacing these any more than they have to. They're also chatting a lot about, lifespan, 20, 30 years of a lifespan. Well, for Christ's sake, we have bridges that haven't been replaced in twice that lifespan, right? We have bridges whose lifespan was 40 to 50 years that have been up for 100, 110 years, and we need to start looking at that. Some of those with a lifespan of 20 to 30 years have been up 50 to 60. We got to look at that. And it's not just the maintenance and the disposal of the components that people seem to be upset about. The view. Well, that's a very subjective thing, and you can't really impose your subjective opinions onto others and expect them to all behave and react in the same way. I am not going to be bothered by a wind farm. I am not bothered by wind farms when I drive by them on on I-40, there's at least a dozen between here and Albuquerque. Now, I will say that this is an expression, or I should say a counter experience to form and function, right? Let's take a ubiquitous example. The automobile is one of the most hideous, ugliest things ever. Just by its nature, right? I mean, years ago, when we still only had like 30 states or 20 states, horses was the way to get around, and those are animals. And being an animal, much like any other animal, there's characteristics to the animal that makes it aesthetically less challenging to deal with. I mean, they stink and they poop and whatever else, but it's an animal. A car is a machine that we've tried to make as pleasing as possible by modifying its form over the centuries. If you don't believe me, look at the Model A and the Model T. And then you get into the early Porsches, which just look like 3 packing boxes held together with tape. And then you have the cars that look like doorstops, right? But overall, the form is what we are doing to ourselves. I don't know. I don't know if I can say that the entire wind farm is built by blowhards. But I don't think that it's something we should dismiss out of hand on an emotional level, right? I mean, there are lots of things I see in the world that I don't want to see, but I don't really have a choice, do I? So I don't think the aesthetics are... No. You're being ridiculous, computer. Huh. All right, so I'm trying to engage, and it's not letting me. But I could type last week, and now it won't let me type this week. I don't get it. Or was that even yesterday? It seemed like it was happening. It looked like it was working. There we go. All right. Got one thing working. Everything else is fine. But yes, the wind farm idea off the deal. They're talking in sizes and distance and such that I think that they've over capitalized on personal sensory development. That is, if I get on the ocean, when I get on the ocean, I'm heading out to Bald Head Island. I can't see Bald Head Island until we start getting pretty close. Now, maybe... Okay, so yes, the moving parts require lubrication, not necessarily oil, and it can be grease. Keep in mind, Crisco is also grease, but it is non-toxic. Now, the killing of birds, I'm not convinced that that is necessarily exclusive. I don't think that that's going to be, I mean, we kill birds on the highway, we kill birds on the freeway, we kill birds in the air, come on. And it's not like suddenly the death of other animals is something that we're going to take into account and put above our own importance. We don't do that with babies, for Christ's sake. We didn't do that in Uvalde. So I don't believe that that's a legitimate argument in context with the with the wind farms, right? Now, if you're throwing babies in the air and they're getting chopped up by the wind blades, okay, you might have something. But we don't generally have flying babies. So, yeah, a lot of things kill birds. My God, we kill birds. Just human beings throwing rocks and BB guns and God knows what else. Pull! So, again, not really a strong argument. And as far as being a poor use of land, the argument they were all about was having these in the ocean, actually. And as far as a poor use of land, my time in New Mexico, I got to tour Kirtland Air Force Base quite a number of times, where the Sandia National Laboratories is located. And they have a number of different, now these were developments in the 80s, so the technology is probably 40 years advanced, but one of them was an entire solar array of mirrors, not necessarily collectors, but mirrors, and they would concentrate. Man, I need more coffee. They would concentrate all the sunlight onto the boiler, much like, every other electrical format. You boil water, turn it into steam, you route the steam to turn a turbine. The turbine spins a magnet inside a static coil. The static coil generates electricity, and boom, you have light. It's really cool. Now you have an argument that I can work with. Fishing and some of this, right? Some of the other arguments. Oh, I don't doubt that it's a massive area, right? It's almost like standing in a formation of military men when you do your dress right, and you have to make sure everybody's got enough space that when you twirl your rifle, you don't smack somebody in the skull or slice off a leg with the bayonet. So independent of how the design for the space is laid out, I don't have much information on that, but on the emotional responses, I had a hell of a problem. And it is going to be massive. There are massive areas. We were in... God, where were we? Salina, something like that, in Kansas. Man, I feel bad for those folks in Kansas. Beautiful country, right? Rolling hills. When we were there, it just happened to be I was picking up some equipment and driving back through one of the most torrential downpours I've ever experienced in my life. But on the way there and on the way back, we saw massive, massive wind farms. And I will say that after living in areas where there was nuclear power, there was coal power, I tell you what, this one was far more attractive. And as far as being a waste of space, what is it? What'd you call it? Poor use of land. Considering you need about the same amount of land for any one of the 4 types of electricity generating plants, that I think this one was probably the least offensive visually, because and it certainly smelled better, right? And there was a lot less humans around, a lot less infrastructure as far as having to have streets and stop signs and stoplights and stuff. It was just a little dirt access road like somebody's little ranch, right? And in a lot of cases, I think this is what's going to be what's happening to some of the farmers. They can set up a section of their land that isn't as fertile as it could be and rent it out, lease it out like they do for cell phone towers. Because if you really want to get upset about something, I think the cell phone towers that have cropped up, every 20 feet is far less attractive than any wind tower. Not gonna. That's not my job. Right, I'm still struggling with the arguments that were presented last night, independent of finance. Now, to your point, using a calculator to determine the cost of building such farms versus the energy produced, that's the whole business model, right? Being an open market, it's up to them. I don't have a dime in this thing. I just don't want to have electricity that costs more than money. So in a number of ways, this argument, as far as like ROI, which is what you're trying to address here, that's not our concern, right? I mean, Texas being their own independent, silly selves, the rest of the country has an electrical grid in 3 sections that we're trying to maintain and develop and make affordable, right? If we want to make electricity a public utility, I've heard a lot of arguments for this. Water and electricity and internet should all be, and sewage should all be public utilities. So we want to find something that's efficient and effective. And exploring any of those, I mean, if you can burn algae to heat water, to generate steam, to turn a turbine, I'm all for it. And yes, the government has been providing money via incentives for centuries. I mean, transcending governments that stand today. I mean, the entire development, that incentive, the Sandia National Laboratories, for Christ's sake, Manhattan Project. How do you think we got the microwave? That was a scientific discovery by Bell Laboratories while on a gig for the government, right? Velcro, same thing, right? There's so many components of our lives that we do not realize are developed through government contracts and government research, usually through DOD. So that's not a very strong argument. They've been doing that forever, and in some cases, they will encourage the private market. Look at Tesla. I mean, look at the big 3 automakers. What, 20 years ago, when they all had to be bailed out, bailing out the banks. So don't get mad at the wind farm for that. Trying to develop energy is very much a government-driven. We have an interest, and there's there is a movement that people want to have many more of these services. No, it doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make it wrong either. It just makes it as one of the ways that R&D can be accelerated, because the private sector doesn't have what it did back in, I'll even say, the 1930s, when ENIAC was being developed. Right, there are a number of stories of people developing and building, inventing computers that took over their entire households, right? And then that's what became the government development of ENIAC, et cetera, et cetera. Nuclear is the best option. I think Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile. None of these are without peril. So, best option, a Dyson sphere. I mean, and I think there are options. I can't say that there is a best option. No one died from nuclear. Wow. Yeah. Okay. But I think that we are disclosing, they just built it in the wrong place. Well, sometimes it's all you got. I mean, if I own the prime land, that would be perfect as a person, as a, individual, and I own the prime land for a nuclear facility, power generation facility, and I don't want to sell. You can't compel me. So the government has whatever land they can get their hands on. They could put it on Yellowstone. I mean, the geothermal there alone should power us for a while. But I think there are any energy options that we haven't even developed yet, right? Battery technology, as far as the development, I'm not talking about the strip mining and all the other crap that's got people all up and going. I'm more referring to a better understanding of how valence electrons are borrowed and stripped from one another to generate energy. That is, if you take a copper penny and a zinc nail, you can generate 1.5 volts of electricity from a lemon. Just let that one sink in for a minute. Because electricity can be free. The sun is free. The wind is free. I think that we are not exploring energy options that could be there, that could do us good work, but we're not putting energy into those yet. So the top stopgap measure to continue to provide energy, and I don't know that hydrogen from water is the future. The electrolysis required, the amount of energy required to get hydrogen out of water, when we can just extract hydrogen naturally, it is one of the most abundant elements in the universe. So I don't think the hydrogen from water itself is the future, but I can see hydrogen as an energy source. I mean, it is what fuels the sun. And the 1.5 gigawatts is not lost on me as a joke, but we're not going... The goal is not to go back in time. The goal is to go into the future and looking at the options that we currently have, whether it's wind on land or at sea, or if it's going to be another Fukushima, is it going to be another Chernobyl, right? Is it going to be another coal fire plant disaster? What was that coal ash happened in 2008, I think it was. We had a discussion about it yesterday. And yeah, it caused problems. It does cause problems. So it's more than... There's no one answer to any of this. So I find it difficult to... My pushback was more on the emotional side. There was a lot of emotional reactions to this that I don't think was entirely fair to anyone in the business specifically. So it's kind of hard when somebody comes at me with, hey, look at all the financial and benefits, and then the rebuttal to that is it looks bad and kills birds. We kill birds driving down the road. We shoot birds. It's not like we give a real rat's butt about birds proper. We don't. So that argument just didn't work for me either. So it's more the emotional knee-jerk reaction that I'm having a response to. But that's me. But I do understand and I accept that nuclear is a viable option. Wind is a viable option. Solar is a viable option. The development of the technology behind them is going to determine which one's going to be safer, because none of them are safe, right? You're strip mining and you're taking stuff out of the earth and it's going to cause problems. Well, that's for making batteries and everybody's up in arms about that. But, look at what we have to do to get oil. Look at what we have to do to get gas. Look at what we have to do to refine that material. And most of them, right, the three majors, the gas, the coal, and the nuclear, all rely on the same function of boiling water to generate steam, to turn a turbine, to generate electricity. That's 5 mechanical steps that I think that our future is actually going to be a more profound understanding of energy and how we can transfer from one form to another without the loss of energy in a mechanical format. That is, when you drive your car, the gasoline is effectively a battery in liquid form that gets transferred into your engine and becomes mechanical energy to drive the car forward and charge the battery and power your radio and your cell phone and whatever else. I think if we can develop an understanding of directly transferring energy from one form to another, we can get away from a lot of that. But that's just me. And I have a guest waiting for me in the wings here that I need to go ahead and take a commercial break. And when we come back, I'm hoping Russ will still be here with us so we can banter some more. Because it's fun when I have somebody, even, a disembodied spirit to argue with. It makes life a lot more fun. So with that in mind, we're going to take a quick Well, okay, about 2.5 minutes. We'll be right back on the Asylum. Don't go nowhere.
Hello, I'm Matt Bennett with WWAY News. People who live in Wilmington will be paying higher property taxes now that City Council has approved the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The $251 million budget goes into effect July 1st. That budget will make funding available for affordable housing, public transportation, and infrastructure improvements. The budget also includes a 3.7% property tax increase, which means the average homeowner will see about a $38 increase on their annual bill. Luke Waddell was the only council member to vote against it. Councilmember Kevin Spears made a motion to allow for the first 30 minutes free in parking decks on Market and 2nd Streets rather than eliminating the 90-minute grace period entirely. That passed 4-3. Some residents are feeling a little safer today following an event by the Wilmington Police Department that helps the public better understand their equipment. WPD held its 25th annual demo day yesterday. Officers explained how they use a variety of vehicles like jet skis and a helicopter, as well as horses, to protect the community. Some lucky kids even got to climb into the vehicles, getting a feel for what it's like to be a part of the department. In addition to Demo Day, Wilmington Police also hosted its annual Cop Camp, which introduces children to a day in the life of law enforcement. In Columbus County, the Sheriff's Office Animal Protective Services has so many animals up for adoption, the price of all adoptions is cut in half for the rest of the month. The shelter posted on social media it is at maximum capacity and doesn't have any kennels available. Staff would like help from fosters, adopters, and 501c3 rescue groups. Until the end of the month, the price to adopt a dog is now $67.50. The price to adopt cats ranges between $27 and $37. Adoptions include a spay or neuter voucher and a rabies vaccine. Dog adoptions also include dewormer and a vaccine against parvovirus and bordetella. For more on these stories, you can head over to WWAYTV3.com. I'm Matt Bennett. Have a great day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm WWAY meteorologist Ramel Carpenter with the Storm Track 3 forecast. Get ready for the hottest day of the week as our high temperatures climb into the middle and perhaps the upper 90s away from the coast. Coastal areas will be toasty as well, getting into the upper 80s with a low-end risk for rip currents this afternoon for eastern and southern-facing beaches. Only a small chance for showers and storms to develop later this evening. Most backyards will stay dry, but will remaining warm and muggy overnight as our temperatures fall to the middle 70s. Get your full forecast on WWAY and WWAYTV3.com.
This news and weather is brought to you by 2 Men and a Truck. For your free quote, go to 2menandatruck.com. 2menandatruck.com.
I'm Trey Allen, conservative candidate for the North Carolina Supreme Court. As a Marine Corps veteran, practicing attorney, professor of law, and father of 5, I want to pass on the precious freedoms that we inherited to the next generation. For that to happen, we need judges who will faithfully apply our Constitution and our laws, not rewrite them to achieve specific outcomes. If you share my commitment to liberty, please vote Trey Allen in 2022. Paid for by Trey Allen for Justice.
Acoustic wave therapy at the Frank Institute is a revolutionary treatment for inflammation, issues of blood flow, and is a solution for the constant suffering of chronic pain. Through the localized transmission of sound waves, stem cells are stimulated to bring about restored blood flow, vascular regeneration, and the disbursement of pain receptors to affected areas. If you've been told that your issues could not be treated without surgery or prescription, give us a call. Non-invasive, non-surgical, and prescription-free. Acoustic wave therapy is only available at the Frank Institute. Call today, 910-679-8534, and ask about acoustic wave therapy.
Enjoying Big Talker Network is as easy as asking for it. Program your digital home assistants such as Google Home, Alexa, and Siri to stream Big Talker Network content by simple voice command. Enjoy convenient hands-free access to program whenever you want, however you want by asking for Big Talker.
Hey, welcome back to the Asylum, your refuge in a world gone mad, right here on the Big Talker Network. And one of the victims from last night's debate,
victims,
Mr. Dan Romand here, joining us from Full Circle Fitness. It almost turned into blows last night at one point.
Yeah, it was. Let's call it a spirited discussion. A good one.
Yeah.
But it's funny because as a host of that show or co-host of that show, I like to sit back and let the guests talk. People don't want to hear me talk. Well, some do, but and and I was listening to everything they were saying, as I was the week prior, and we've had both sides of the debate on the show. I'll be honest, I have not heard anything from either side to convince me one way or the other regarding wind power. I'm completely neutral on it. I see the pluses, I see the minuses. The minuses worry me a little bit. Mostly, the fact that you're going to landfill the blades is something that I'm not a fan of. What you may not know is I was in an energy industry. About 15 years ago, I worked for a company that did waste to energy. So they burned trash to make electricity. So, for example,
tradition in third world countries.
Well, I'll tell you, we had plants in St. Croix, Cape Cod, Springfield, Mass, and Pittsfield, Mass. Like, for example, Springfield, Massachusetts, basically their electricity is generated from garbage.
Right. That's what the incinerator idea was in New Mexico for a while.
And there's a lot of pluses to that. There's negatives. I'm not going to say there's not. But you talk about renewable energy. Well, trash is never going to go away. And right now we're burying it. And what people don't know about landfills is they leak, and they leak bad. I don't care what anybody tells you, they leak.
Well, so along those lines, a funny story I discovered as a young boy when they were trying to work out a way to protect the water table, right? Because New Mexico is a very dry environment, but we needed a landfill. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to line the landfill with a impermeable layer of plastic so that they could do the landfill on top, and then the plastic would hold it. New Mexico is incredibly dry. So what ended up happening is that the plastic became incredibly brittle and cracked, and the very material from which they wanted to protect the trash from the environment became the contaminant for the environment.
And part of the problem, right?
So, yeah, and some incinerations, of course, you're going to have material that should not be released into the atmosphere after being combusted, and it's hard to separate all of them.
That's true, but it's also not as bad as is made out, just to circle back on the landfill, I actually watched one being built, and the engineer for our company was with me. And in this case, they were laying down first rubber mats. And then it's just like you talk about, then they go over it with plastic, and that's the liner, they called it. And he would point out, like he would see right there where they put it, that's going to leak in there. And he said, this thing's going to leak like crazy. The other thing that people don't know about landfills, there was one where I'm originally from, which was Albany, New York. Now, when I was a wee young lad back in the early 70s, that thing was down about 60 feet. It's now 200 plus feet in the air. It's a big mountain and getting bigger by the day. What they do is they do core samples, they're called. They drill down. Well, they drilled down to about 1971 or 72. They pulled out a head of lettuce and a newspaper. The head of lettuce hadn't rotted at all, and the newspaper, you could still read it because there's no oxygen, right? When they landfill, they cover with dirt, and it just keeps the oxygen out, so it can't rot. So that stuff's going to be there forever. So when you look at these wind turbine blades, they're never going away. They're going to be there thousands upon thousands of years from now. So that's one of the negatives that bothers me. But the other side of it is it's renewable energy, right? There's always wind, not consistently, but it's there.
I still have trouble with the term renewable because it's not. It's just energy. It's not
True. What is I'm trying to remember the scientific term for it. Energy is always in existence. It's just different forms. Like
right. You can't lose energy. It just.
Right.
It either becomes heat or movement or something, but
I'm not a scientist enough to even answer that. But my view is I think all options are on the table. It's probably going to be.
I think all options are in play.
Yeah.
Right. Hydroelectric, but we have Lake Mead going to hell.
Yeah, I mean, there's problems with hydro.
We have other dam collapses like the one in Michigan, the one in Brazil. That was actually a mining, a slurry pit thing where they take the stuff they don't want and make little mounds out of it. And apparently the mound failed, and that's what caused the massive failure in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. But the same concepts of these failures, every form of generating energy has risks and downsides to every one of them, and every one of them has different ROIs. One of the things Russ put out here for me to look at, and I thought it was, I mean, for lack of a better term, being a little snarky. Use a calculator to determine the cost of building such farms versus the energy production. I don't think the energy companies, whichever, private or public, would be interested in building one if there wasn't going to be a return. So asking, right, and asking me about the finances of it is like, yo, man, I'm just worried about my electric bill. Whatever it takes to put it down another nickel or two is kind of cool, but I think that we're negating the option, or we're negating the... We're closing the box that these are the only options we have. We don't really...
They can get very passionate about the one that they feel is the solution. Like the last couple of weeks, it's been wind power.
It's like being your favorite actor or your favorite musician.
Right. But there's there is no one. Like you were talking about before I came on, you were talking about hydrogen. There's a lot of promise to that. There's a thing that I've been reading about, it was probably a few months ago, about carbon, where they pull carbon out of the air and create energy from that. It's just like one article I read, but I was like...
Carbon is in, like, every cow fart is based on a carbon atom.
Yeah.
So if you could harvest cow farts, we would have plenty of methane to which we could fire up a boiler and make steam and turn it into mechanical energy to spin a magnet inside an electric field or inside a coil to generate electricity.
There you go.
But all of these are borrowing the same back end, other than wind and solar. Your gas, your nuclear, your hydro, everything is requiring turning one form of energy into mechanical energy to turn it into another form of energy.
Yep.
I think the future, in some cases, Russ is very much a nuclear proponent. I think that if we can let go of that, being any one proponent, and start looking at, like, you have a lemon in your house?
A lemon?
A lemon, an actual lemon from a tree.
No, but I do have a lemon tree, just no lemons on it yet.
You do know that each lemon is a 1.5 volt battery.
I do know. Yeah, I remember back in high school doing that experiment.
A zinc nail and a copper penny, and you can generate 1.5 volts from a fruit. If that can happen, why do we need something as dangerous as nuclear or something as nasty as coal, right? That's just unpretty. Something as stressful, if you don't understand the stress behind a hydroelectric dam, I encourage you to explore that. Just those three forms of energy that we've been relying on don't have pretty pictures to them, if that makes sense. They're not...
Right. The problem is scalability. How many lemons would it take to power the world?
But if a lemon can do that, then somehow there's going to be a chemical reaction that we can generate naturally ourselves that would produce the same results.
Well, I know one of the things along the lines of what you're talking about is fusion technology, where, and I am not a scientist, but I know there's work being done there, which basically is mirroring what the sun does,
Trying to. And
Trying
the Dyson sphere would be cool, but for practical purposes, at least looking at options that aren't emotionally rejected.
That's the problem, is emotions are coming into play on all of these. The whole, we got to go green. Solar has big negatives. I had solar on my house when I lived up north. And I will tell you, I loved it in the summer, right? We generated more electricity than we needed, and I would get a nice fat check come October because we sent it back to the grid. That's But then in the winter months, we were barely generating anything, and if we got a snowfall that hung on the roof, we might not generate anything for 3-4 weeks. So solar has a place, absolutely. Huge fan, right? But to think that that's going to solve the problem in and of itself is fallacy. Same with wind, right? Wind has a place. It can be wonderful, but there's going to be times, like I was talking last night off air, we were talking about hurricanes. And I said, they're going to shut them down the day before a hurricane because they have to prep for them. So they're going to generate nothing then. They're not going to generate during the hurricane. And it might be a few days afterward before they generate again. So that, I think they were throwing out 5-7% of the power generation for the area. That disappears when a hurricane happens. What do? Right? Doesn't mean we can't do solar or wind. They are part of the solution. They are not the only solution. Problem is, it's become so emotional and now political. That we've got to go to wind and solar, and that's going to be the solution for everything. Well, it's not.
Well, so one of the other issues that I had trouble with as far as being an argument base was the aesthetics. Because I've driven across this country on tour, and I've seen a number of wind farms and solar farms and different energy production facilities that are more traditional in nature. And I have to say the least offensive ones were probably the wind and solar farms. There was less traffic. There was less infrastructure interruption, meaning, you didn't have parking lots and 1,000 people trying to man a facility, right? It just sits there, and one guy goes out there with a truck now and again and squirts a little WD-40 where he needs it. And for the most part, it's left
that tower.
Right. It's pretty much left the hell alone.
Whatever they pay that guy that has to climb that tower and do that stuff, he ain't getting paid enough. I'm sorry. There's no way in hell I would do that.
Oh, the guys that do the lights on top, those are the ones who get me.
Oh, my God. But, it's funny. You talk about the aesthetic side of it. On land, I kind of agree with you. On the ocean, I got to lean towards I'm not a fan. And I have no reasonable explanation for it. Honestly. I don't. I'm like, put it on top of a mountain.
Well, you're not used to skylines, right?
Yeah, I mean, see, the view is, or the way. I snuck that in there.
I like that.
Unintended one. But, if I'm looking at one, say, on a mountain ridge, I'm like, oh, that's cool. That looks great, right? It wouldn't bother me. But if I'm sitting on the beach looking out and there's a turbine out there, it would bother me. And again, no logic, no reasoning behind it.
It's just emotional.
No sense. It's just,
and you haven't seen it yet. You're imagining something that hasn't happened, so you're trying to vision it for yourself. Because have you sat on a beach and looked out and seen wind turbine
I have
jets?
not seen it live. I have seen pictures from beaches, and again, that doesn't tell the whole story, right? So it's like, I'm not a fan.
Now, is it any more offensive than what we see people stuff into swimsuits on our own beaches?
Or the monstrous holes they dig on the beach and then leave.
Right. Or, the reason why we have to do big sweeps. Or in the case of performing, the drunk woman who walked off, in my shoes.
Really? No, my wife and I were walking on Curry the other day, and no joke, someone had dug a hole. It was minimum 6-8 feet deep, probably 8 to 10 to 12 feet wide, and left it.
Somebody has a big regret they were trying to bury.
I'm like, were they trying to bury a body? It was the first thought I had. And I'm like, if that had ever caved in on whomever, that person would have been dead because you wouldn't have dug the sand out fast enough. But it's aesthetics. When we're, you're right. I don't disagree with you. I have not seen it, so I can't say for certain that I'm dead set against it or for it.
Right.
I have seen them on land. Honestly, I thought it was pretty cool. There were 2 or 3 of them. They weren't the 500 footers, but it was like, oh, that's cool. And I kept driving,
right. It's not offensive to the point that it's distracting.
Right. To me, what ultimately what I focus on is what the same thing, like you mentioned earlier, the power companies focus on. What's the return on investment?
Right. That's not my
because if you think they're going to build this wind farm at their cost, oh no, my friends. I know Duke Energy is one of the companies bidding on being the contractor. They're going to pass that cost on. Now, initially you have to build it. There's a cost. We all know that. And I'm okay as long as in the long run, the bills are going to come down. My fear is, they're going to jump the bills a few dollars a month. I have no idea what that number is because no one will answer that if you notice. But then that doesn't come down in the long run. I don't mind paying short-term more for long-term less. But if it's short-term more for long-term more, that doesn't make sense to me.
So how do you feel about your water bill now that ChemWars is no longer...
Don't even get me started on that.
Because that's our next conversation with Dr. Cahoon. The water rates are now effectively it's showing up on your water bills now.
It absolutely is.
What we're paying for is a $30 million upgrade to the Sweeney water plant that should be ChemWars' responsibility. And however it happened, Mr. $9 million a year bonus guy on $1 million, he's making $10 million a year, is still being able to walk away scot-free while poisoning the entire Cape Fear watershed, and our water bill goes up to compensate for their insanity. Now, Russ did point out that there's going to be some government incentive, much like there has been in R&D, usually through the DoD arm of the military, for much of what we enjoy today, everything from microwaves to vulcanized tires, right? So that I don't disagree with, because the development of infrastructure is a public interest.
True, but again, as you mentioned, we're paying for what they did. When people bring up things like government incentives and all that stuff, I always look at that with a jaundiced eye. It's usually somebody's pockets are getting lined with that government incentive. It's never. I mean, I shouldn't say never. It's mostly not to the benefit of you and I, the average taxpayer. Let's just put it that way.
Somebody's making a $9 million a year bonus.
Yeah. Like they talk about, well, we got to build housing around here because people are moving here. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but who's making the real money on this? And
why is a $50,000 crap house going for, $1.2 million?
I mean, it's insane, right? And then they talk about, well, we got to build affordable housing. Yes, we do. But who's getting that money, right? And government money's never...
affordable to who?
Well, that's the other thing. How do you define affordables? And I had that conversation not too long ago with someone. But, getting back to the wind thing, I haven't heard anything that's changed my mind one way or the other. I was neutral to begin with. I'm neutral now. I think that it has some viability. Is it the be all end all? Not a chance in hell. You would probably have to line both coasts of the United States and it still wouldn't, I don't think, generate enough to cover our energy needs. And let's face it, without energy, we become a third world nation overnight.
Oh, like the Ukraine has?
Exactly. That you kind of stole my thunder there, because that's what I was going to talk about.
Oh, sorry.
Look at what happens in eastern Ukraine right now, right? Their power grid's down. Those people they're in survival mode. It's where can I get food and water? That's all they care about.
They're hunting food.
Yeah, they're not worried about, what so-and-so said on social media or what ex-politicians do. They could care less about that. And unfortunately, as you said, they start hunting food, and sometimes they're hunting each other to take the food from one another. And if you think about our power grid right now, I always laugh at the people with the electric cars, and I'm like, see in the next few weeks what happens in California, because they're going to have their rolling brown and blackouts, and people are not going to be able to drive their electric cars. I'm not against electric cars. I wish I could afford one, to be honest with you. I think they're cool.
Oh, man, China has released a $2,000 electric truck. I just saw a review on it after 4 months, and the guy has been beating the hell out of it on his farm, and he loves it. $2,000 plus the shipping.
$2,000 I can afford.
Right.
$60,000 I can't. Sorry, Pete Buttigieg. I just can't afford to buy that right now. But I'm not, again, I'm in favor of them, but I also...
How about a sail car? That way you can use wind power to, just like we do with ships, we could do that with cars.
Well, there's hydrogen power too, right? And there's actually propane-powered cars. There's all sorts
and the adaptation to propane is stupid simple. It's just the pressure. issue.
It is. But again, people are touting that we just got to go electric cars. That's going to solve everything. It's a fraction.
If we were serious, we would go pedal car.
We would go Flintstone. I always say Flintstone.
Yeah, I mean, but the bicycle built for 2, you can do that for 4, 8, 12, 16. They have one that goes up and down downtown Wilmington. You can get drunk. It's a bar.
Oh, I
you
call it
sit on the bar, right, and you sit there and pedal with your feet while you're getting hammered, listening to god-awful music, rolling up and down the street.
I laugh.
Sharing your bad taste with everybody around you.
It just cracks me up every time I see it, but it is a form of transportation, right?
And it's using renewable energy. That is honestly renewable energy. Because you're taking in the carbohydrates and turning it directly into, what is it, lactate? The stuff that makes your legs burn?
Well, that would be, lactate. Yeah.
Lactate. So, you're doing the conversion and it's renewable because you can get on it 20 minutes later and do the same thing.
Problem is you got to fuel yourself to be able to keep doing it.
That's what the carbs in the beer are about.
Right, which has to be generated elsewhere, which takes energy. See,
and it takes water, it takes water from the Cape Fear River and spices up that Chemours, right, and makes a little Gen X batch.
I mean, it's all interconnected in some way or another. It's funny how that is, but I just, on last night and then the week before, and it'll be interesting because we're supposed to have the groups back on next week. I don't know how it's going to go. I'm going to be honest. It could be very interesting, but I honestly don't think either group can change my mind one way or the other.
And all three of you are going to need to be referees for that.
I view it as it's an option. It's absolutely an option that should be on the table, considered, implemented in some form or another. But to think that that's the be all end all, which is what it's being touted at by some people, no. Nor is nuclear the be all end all. I am a proponent of nuclear. I do think it's viable. It's fairly, I'm going to use the word clean, knowing that it's not totally clean. Let's be clear on that. But again, it's got to be on the table. Whatever options are out there, we got to get the emotion out of it. Let's look at it from a pragmatic, scientific thing. Where can we get the most energy out of the least cost? That should be where we're looking. And unfortunately, it's more about emotion than anything else.
Right now, all the arguments against it, and some of the arguments the Wind Coalition ladies presented last week, they incorporated some of the actual quantitative negatives, right? They weren't going with the subjective nature. They were saying, yes, this does have this type of effect, the development of lubricants as opposed to oil or grease, because that's what it is. We have dry lubricants such as graphite in the doors that we use, every day, but we don't freak out on that. So I think there's a lot of overblown knee-jerk reaction meant to exacerbate the argument, as opposed to if you read Scientific American or even Pop Sci on a monthly basis, you would understand that the development of lubricants is a 50-year business. So what we have today is remarkably safer and more biodegradable and far less toxic than anything we had before. And I think the amount of, the one guy was saying, gallons of this stuff, hundreds of gallons, it'll be like, no, dude. It's the equivalent for that entire head when sealed, because they're not leaving this open to the environment. All the stuff that moves is going to be sealed inside that hub.
It has to be in order to work right.
And it's going to take maybe the equivalent of a WD-40 can to keep that thing lubricated.
The other side, though, when talking about the ladies the week before, though, is they were avoiding a lot of the questions that I was asking. They were being political with it, because I had a few people that had the discussion with me. They listened to the show and they're like, they really didn't answer your question. I went, no, they were political on it. Things like burying the cables. Oh yeah, it's just going to be buried. It's no big deal. It is a big deal, right? I want to know the details on it.
But we've been doing that for 100 years.
Well, we do it with internet cable, right?
Yeah, we've been burying utility cables across the ocean.
Exactly. Well, they don't even bury them like internet cables. They just lay them on the floor. They're buried in certain areas, but you get over the Marianas Trench, they're not burying them
Well, they're looking at
30,000 feet.
displacement depth, right? So
Right.
anything within a shipping channel and shower,
And it's got to be buried. Right.
it's got to be
right.
buried and anchored. And in other places, it's.
They
But then
can
again,
float.
those are also carrying a lot of electricity. So when the guy was saying, "Oh, it's carrying these little magnetic fields, electrical fields, and it's going to cook the fish," no, man.
Yeah, and it's
If
but,
that were true,
no.
you would be sterilized driving your car.
But the other side, when you ask the people in favor of things, like I was like, well, how much electricity is it going to generate? They did everything they can to avoid that question, which has me wondering, right? The ultimate answer I got was the same as a nuclear power plant. Well, what the hell is that?
Oh, again,
And why wouldn't I then build a nuclear power plant? That's a disingenuous answer to me. I want to know, okay, if we're putting, I think the number they threw out was 70 of them. How many homes is that going to power for how long? That's the question I'm going to ask. Because there was a lot of, well, we can't answer that because we're not the developers. Well,
all you have to do is go to Raytheon's website. And
I know you can go research.
Yeah, Raytheon actually has for their hubs, right? Because the tower is separate from the hub, separate from the blades. So these are all being made in different places. I think some of the blades are being made in France, some are made here.
Yeah, they're overseas. The blades are made, I believe.
But the Raytheon makes one of the more popular hubs, and depending on the size of the hub, right, they can generate so much electricity per event. So if they're saying you have a steady 20-mile-an-hour wind, we can generate X kilowatts, which is the equivalent of, 15 square blocks.
But there's my point, right? You're saying you can go to that website and nail it down. How do they not know that and give me that answer? Why?
I can answer that.
Why aren't they giving me that answer?
Because they haven't decided which hub they're going to use, right? Because in your study, you have to do an environmental impact study before you ever break ground. So part of all of these studies is going to be what size hub they can use, what size arms they're going to use, or blades. Right, so some of the arguments that the one guy brought up that are going to have these 900-foot blades. No, dude, no way. They're not going to. That's a what?
Well, if it was 900 foot on a 800-foot tower, it'd be dragging in the water.
Right, and you're looking at nearly a 15-story building as far as overall construction height, right? Because you need 20 feet for the waves before you ever begin the blade. So I don't think that there's been a selection of the hardware going into the farm because we haven't.
There's a problem I have with that. So this is a done deal. They're building it. How is that not already answered?
Well, that was true of the nuclear plant down in Southport.
Yes.
It was built before anybody had a chance to say, hey, what's going on here?
We have
the electric company said we need electricity, and a nuclear company said, hey, we need to sell a nuclear reactor.
Yep, we'll build it and worry about the details later. And there's my issue with everything, right? Unfortunately, I'm too logical. I'm an ex-IT guy. I think A to B to C to D, not A to D, and we'll worry about B and C down the road. Like the ladies were talking about, well, we're not worried about the blades being, decommissioned and buried because maybe down the road we'll be able to recycle them. Maybe not. I don't know. But to your point, they should know how much energy they can generate. They should already know what they're going to be using before we make a final decision. We're past that point. This is done deal. It's not if they're going to build these, they're being built.
It's like when you build a house, you know the house is going to be built. You've already bought the land, right? And as you lay the foundation, the specifications for the house may change. For example, you're just now ordering your materials and the code has changed for hurricane safety. So now you need to redress everything that's in your inventory and the design of your house. The project is still going to go through. But now you have to rethink all of your selections and all of your decisions to make sure they match the new code. And that's sort of what's happening here.
Decide to walk away. Because it may be the new code makes it so expensive you don't want to build it.
No, you're still going to build because you're already in financially to the loan. You're into the you're in it. You're not.
I know people that have.
You're not pulling a Donald Trump on this one. You're in it. I mean, you're all the way down to what was the ugly son he doesn't like? I'm kidding.
I have no idea.
Eric.
I don't worry
it's
about
Eric
him
Trump
anymore.
that
I that is ancient. I don't deal with him anymore. I mean, it's 2022. Let it go. The dude is done. I'm not worried about him. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion all the way around. The viewpoint I have is really no real information has been given. It's emotional. It's political. It's not scientific. I'm not hearing much science here. And again, I am neutral. I need to do more research. That's on me. Because the sources that we've had are not convincing me. And, I've watched a couple of YouTube videos on it. You find the exact same thing. It's either an emotional for, we got to have it because it's green, blah, 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 or an emotional against it, tears up the environment, kills 500,000 birds, blah, 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 blah. Give me the facts. I want facts because that's how I make a decision. But unfortunately, facts seem to be in very short supply, hard facts. A lot of supposition, a lot of, well, this might happen or this might not happen. Like I brought up last night, if this thing's near the shipping lanes, but not in the shipping lanes, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, is that really a problem? But it might be. They were saying last night it was a huge problem. I got to believe the Coast Guard is looking at this going, yeah, we're not going to let a tanker hit one of those towers because that would be really bad.
And for it to interfere with GPS, I thought was far-fetched. GPS has RF, it deals with things using electronic signals.
I have no idea.
Now, I do have another guest that's joining us who is very familiar with the water. Dr. Cahoon, are you with us, sir?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Earlier today, the conversation of windmills popped up, and...
Right. I thought I caught that theme.
Now, last week, I believe, were you at the third annual PFAS convention?
No, I was at another meeting, the University Council on Water Resources meeting, which is a national level meeting.
Wow.
Was held in Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay, because I was hoping you would be at the convention so you could do like some cosplay or get an autograph. Because this is not the type of convention. When I think of a convention, I think of like good food and comic books and autographs But the PFAS convention, the third annual PFAS convention, I mean, they made it sound sexy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I think yours was more effective.
This is the first time I've attended that particular meeting, but it covered all aspects of water resources. And the session I was part of was all about wastewater treatment and the challenges we're facing there, especially on the coast. But there were lots of talks about all aspects of water resources. Some of our compatriots in this country are having a very tough time with water supply. A lot of issues with drought. I mean, here in eastern North Carolina, we've had a drought. In other places, I also managed to visit Ohio. They've had too much rain, and the farmers haven't been able to plant as early as they'd like because of all the rain. So, too much of a good thing or not enough of a good thing.
Man.
Yeah.
So. And we need to put it all in Lake Mead.
Yeah. Yeah, they're I was going to say deep trouble, but I think it's more appropriate to say shallow trouble.
Oh, yeah.
There's not, it's going down steadily. So, we're watching a catastrophe unfold in front of us in real time, and I think catastrophe is the right word. And it's slow moving in the sense that, it's not today. It's happening today, but it's not like everyone dies tomorrow. It's inexorable. There's going to be more and more stress on the entire southwest U.S. and parts of Mexico for that matter. I mean, they get water from the Colorado River too.
Yep.
But you've got a huge drought underway out in that region. And the first effects will be felt, of course, by farmers because irrigation is the largest use of those water supplies. And California's already seen that. They're having to cut water allocations to certain farms and so on. And in California, they've been used to having enough water. They plant almond trees, for example, out in California. That's where we get most of our almonds, right? And almond trees require an awful lot of water.
Wow.
Well, when the creek runs dry and when Lake Mead drops below a certain level, where are you going to get the water to keep those trees growing? So if you like almonds, this might not be a bad time to buy them because they're going to be in shorter supply and more expensive going down the road. But, that's kind of a trivial way of looking at the problem. Once you've cut back on agriculture, you've done a tremendous amount of damage to that agricultural economy. And that ripples throughout the entire economy for us. We get an awful lot of our veggies and fruits from California. And they're all water dependent to some degree. So, that will drive supplies down and prices up.
And the hydroelectric power is going to diminish.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no more pressure to push the turbines.
Yeah. There comes a point where some of those power supplies just stop. They're already cutting back on power generation. I mean, if you can't turn the turbine with the water you've got there, for whatever reason, whether the water has dropped below the intakes or whether the allocation of water points in another direction.
Right.
You've got a problem. I mean, where's your electricity going to come from?
Wind farm.
Wind farms, yeah. Solar panels and so forth and so on. The hydropower accounts for a lot of what they get out west, and taking that off the grid is going to be, again, a big challenge. The real need, of course, is for domestic water uses. That is, flushing your toilets and washing and bathing and all of that. And, they're going to cut back on the non-essential water uses, like people watering their lawns.
I grew up under those restrictions in New Mexico. Your lawn could not be more than like 12 square feet or 12 square yards, something like that.
Yeah, right. Lawn is not a natural habitat out west.
The golf course was sad. It was like a little green strip with brown all the way around it. You could, from the sky, you can point out the golf courses.
Right, yeah. And so, those kinds of non-essential uses are going to go by the board. So, if you want your little patch of lawn out there, you can wave goodbye. Get used to tumbleweed and creosote bush. There's a reason it's a desert.
I'm used to sagebrush and chamisa bushes all day long, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, there you go. Right. I think it's kind of pretty. Now, I've only been through that area, so, I haven't developed the kind of attachment or revulsion that the locals might have developed. I am so tired of tumbleweeds. I don't know. I've seen them. They're interesting, and then I move on. But, clearly a lot of very tough choices are going to have to be made, not just for the region, but for the country. Because, again, we get a lot of our agricultural production out of California and to some degree out of Arizona and so on. And it's Colorado River water subsidizing that. If the water's not there, the farming stops. And then on top of that, you've got dry forests and forest fires. A friend of mine just took a trip out west for vacation and came back a couple weeks ago, and they didn't take the interstates. They took what we call the blue highways.
Okay.
The back roads
to
get a better feel for the countryside. And he said 3 words: drought, fire, and poverty.
That
they
does
all
seem
go
to be,
hand in hand.
one little area.
Yeah. When you have drought, you don't have agricultural production, and therefore the agricultural economy, goes downhill fast. And if that's the predominant economy out in the, away from the cities, then you wind up with fires because of the dry conditions in the forests, and you wind up with poverty on the part of the folks who are trying to make a living out there. If there's a tourism industry, well, the forest fires kind of put that down. No, you can't go there because it's on fire, or you can't breathe the smoke. He said, the air was constantly filled with smoke. Even when they couldn't see a fire, they could smell it everywhere they went. And they went from Texas up to Oregon, and there were fires everywhere. So it's a we hope that this is unusual. We hope that this is a one-off, that we'll get through a period and then it'll come back at us. But I don't think that's really the case. Out west, they're using the term mega drought.
Yeah.
And mega drought refers to, 1,000-year class drought period. In other words, once every 1,000 years it gets this bad. The last mega drought was about 1,000 years ago, and we think that drought did in the local Native American culture of the time, the Anasazi people. Everything got drier than normal. They were adapted to living in what is normally a pretty dry climate. You'd find their settlements around streams and that sort of thing. But when it got hotter and drier, they couldn't handle that. I mean, they had no technology, comparable to ours, of course. But their civilization basically went away. I mean, they had to leave. That's what people do. You see migration away from situations like that. Most likely, they followed the stream beds downstream hoping to find water,
right?
And wound up in very different places as a result, and probably bumped into other folks who are in the same position. And with scarce resources, and you bump into other people, you can imagine what happens.
That's my water.
Yeah, water's a zero-sum game. If I have it, you don't.
I got bigger gun. You can't have my water.
Yeah, and
wait, we do that with oil too, don't we?
That or we develop fracking. Oil's a little bit more complicated, but yeah. Have we fought wars over oil? Yes. Why did the Japanese attack us at Pearl Harbor? Because we had cut off their oil supply. We were their big supplier.
And
the other alternative was the oil fields in Indonesia. And they had to push us out of the way. So World War II in the Pacific was about oil. There were other factors overlaying on that, but strategically they felt they had no choice. And of course, why were we in Iraq more than once?
And that's for something we don't need at the same visceral level as water.
Oil is to some degree replaceable, yeah. And you can ship it from some other place in tankers. It's so energy rich that it makes sense to transport it. Pipelines, big tankers, and so forth, right? We can't do that with water. Water is necessary in such massive quantities that, a tanker full of water just isn't going to make a difference. And it's an expensive way to move an extremely voluminous commodity.
And it does not compress, it does not fold.
Right. it is what it is. There's no way to pack more water into a gallon jug than about a gallon, right? It is what it is, and you got to.
That's why we use it to move other items under the concept of hydraulic.
Yeah, right. I think back to some of the earlier, I don't want to say water wars, but the Southern California is the center of demand for water, okay, between the various valleys and big cities and so forth. And so they're bringing an awful lot of water over from the Colorado River, and they've known for years that they could be in trouble. Well, they are. They have talked about pushing icebergs up from Antarctica. I'm serious. That they thought about that.
That's like that to me. That's up there with the swimming pool that ChemWars wants to put under their building.
Yeah, right. And we'll talk about ChemWars in due time because they're back in the news. The Southern California folks approached Northern California folks and said, "Hey, how about pipelining us some of your water?" Well, the Northern California watersheds are generally small. There's a lot of rainfall up there, but they're very small rivers. So it's not economically viable to do that. They approached Oregon and Washington about tapping the Columbia River, which is big. And basically those two states said, go pound sand. They approached Alaska about water supply, and Alaska, gave them, the middle finger salute. They did approach the Great Lakes states and said, how about we pipe water from the Great Lakes to Southern California? And the Great Lakes states, again, some version of pound sand, middle finger, go fly a kite. Not going to happen, because once you dip that straw into the body of water, how do you not suck it dry?
Yeah, and
right?
we've already shown that. I mean, didn't Nestle suck down most of California's water on the side there?
Yeah, right. I mean, look what they did with their own water supply, and they kept growing. And so now they want to suck somebody else's water.
Hey, I just burned down the
and
last 3 houses I lived in. Can I move in with you?
Right. Oh, and that begs the question of Canada. Now, what's interesting here is you'll recall that Canada was all fine and dandy with us piping oil from Alberta down to Texas, right? The Keystone Pipeline. There's several pipelines, actually.
Right.
All cool with that. Ask the Canadian government, hey, how about pipelining water? Canada's full of water and very few people. And the Canadians say, not a single chance in all of hell are we going to let you have one drop of our water supply. I'm serious. They will not allow that.
Well,
no
Canadian Mist
boundary.
and what's the other? They make a couple of nice liquors up there that requires clean and their beer.
Right. There again, they know, the damned Estados Unidos is going to suck us dry. If we let them dip their straw in our water supply, pretty soon we won't have any left.
And what is left is going to be contaminated backwash from some bad...
Exactly. Right.
Ooh.
So there's no possibility of drawing water from any other geographic location to assuage the needs of Southern California and all of their neighbors. That's not going to happen. So they're going to have to adapt. And adaptation is going to be very difficult. It means cutting back. It means raising the price. It means outlawing or prohibiting certain uses altogether. People are beginning to tear up almond groves, as I mentioned earlier. They are.
What about the swimming
pool?
pools?
Water is, well,
that's got to be
think of some other fluid. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Vegetable oil. I mean, well, we've been having Jello swimming or Jello wrestling competitions for decades now, so maybe that's, the new trend.
Well, you could use seawater, maybe.
Hey, a little beach at home.
Yeah, they could pipe that from the ocean. I'm being facetious, but they're going to have to take a very hard look, whether it's the government that does it or just the price of things forces people to do it. A limited resource that's in high demand is going to become expensive. There's no way around that.
And the more limited it is, the more expensive it becomes.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it doesn't matter who's in the president's seat. That's the part I wish people could understand.
Yeah, supply and demand, the fundamental laws of economics, right? A scarce commodity in high demand is going to be expensive. There's no way around that. They aren't going to give it away. Nobody does that. So it's going to get very expensive in terms of water, and it's going to price out agriculture first because agriculture uses so much. It's going to force more efficiency, and that's possible in agriculture because of the scale. There are ways to do irrigation that are not so prolific in terms of waste. But they're not cheap up front. You have to put in injection systems and all of that. They'll pay for themselves in due time, but not all farmers have that option. In terms of residential use, you're going to have to cut back. That green lawn is going to dry up and blow away. I'm sorry. All your ornamental shrubs, your fancy golf courses and things like that, you're going to have to come up with some other approach that leads to water reuse. I'm hearing about that here. When I say reuse, I mean taking treated sewage water and cleaning it up with reverse osmosis and putting it back in the water supply system. As you might guess, the big obstacle there is public perception.
Oh, man, yeah.
You mean this here water went down my toilet bowl yesterday? I don't want to drink that.
Which is actually how
we can do it.
Yeah, that's how nature works. I mean, the water we're drinking today has been on this planet for millions of years.
Yeah, right. You're probably drinking what used to be dinosaur pee. Back in the day.
And that's why the trees are so green and thick and lush and happy.
Technically, we can clean that water up to an incredibly high standard. Okay, we have the technology to do that, and it's getting cheaper. It's not, really cheap, but it's getting cheaper.
You're not going to find it at Walmart.
No. Well, you can get reverse osmosis systems for your own home. That'll clean everything up. There's a little bit of technical aspect to it. You got to pay attention to the unit and how it's performing and so forth and so on. And now and then you've got to change a filter. But it's no more difficult than water softeners were back in the day. So, it's within the scope of ability of most folks to handle that. Speaking of cleaning up the water supply, that might be a nice segue to talking about chemours.
Oh.
Our good neighbors up there.
I love that slogan. That's awesome.
Yeah, good neighbors. Yeah, we've been poisoning your air and water for 3 or 4 decades, and
without any recourse.
And we hope you'll do the same. Yeah. Well, I'd like to pollute their air and water for 30 or 40 years and just, to kind of even things up, but that would be bad. No, they apparently have, not only are they advertising what good neighbors they're being, they've got a petition effort out asking the public to sign a petition to the Department of Environmental Quality to approve this permit that will allow them to build this wall to trap groundwater that they contaminated for decades. And they claim they're going to clean it up to 99% purity, right? Remove 99% of the chemicals that they should never have allowed in the first place. Well,
And that's just the water, right?
Yeah, right. Now, 99% sounds good, right? Yeah, only 1%
99%
of the
cancer-free.
pollutants would get through. Right, 1% would get through. Now, I'm here to tell you, I would die and go to heaven, or actually I would buy eternal life, if I had 1% of the national budget.
Yeah.
1% of a hell of a lot is a hell of a lot still, right?
Yeah, man.
And the fact is, they can clean that water up to a much higher standard than that.
Because that's saying 99% would be 1 part in 100.
Yeah.
And what we're looking for is like 1 part in in trillion.
In a trillion, that's right.
So the math is completely out of order.
They don't want to spend the money to clean that water up to the standard that it should be. That's our drinking water. And they don't want to clean it up as well as they can. The technology exists. They know it. That's what we're paying for now.
While he's making the
CFPUA.
CEO alone of Chemours made $9 million in bonus money by not spending money correcting the issue.
Right. I'd like to have 1% of his income.
Right. For doing, for not poisoning.
Right. So they're trying to persuade people with this PR campaign to sign a petition telling DEQ to give them the permit that currently specifies that they only have to clean up to 99%. And again, to most people that sounds pretty good. But that 1% represents a whole lot more contaminants than we're actually trying to get. Let me back up. It's a whole lot more contaminants than we ever want to drink, okay? And we're going to have to pay for the CFPUA or the Brunswick County utilities to clean up the rest of it so that it's actually safe for us to drink, okay? And that's just wrong. They don't want to pay the cost of our water utilities to clean up their mess. They're being sued by the utilities to clean up that mess and to pay for what the utilities are having to do, but they don't want to pay for that.
And it's now showing up on people's water bills.
Oh, yes, yeah. The CFPUA is raising water rates to pay for the granular activated charcoal or carbon system that they're going to put online very soon, I think within a month. That's a $45 or $50 million effort, plus about $3 million per year to change out the cartridges. It's huge. They've got I don't want to quote a number. I've been out of town, and my recollection may be a little fuzzy. It's a very large amount of GAC, granular activated carbon, that they've had to install to clean our water supply of Chemours pollution.
In addition to what was already there, just cleaning up fish poop in Deer Park.
Oh, yeah, all the other stuff.
And that stuff's big enough we could get it. That was no problem. But now we have the PFAS is super tiny.
Well, and those compounds are not reactive. See, a lot of the other stuff that's in the water could be broken down by the existing treatment system. CFPUA's plant, the Sweeney Water Treatment Plant, uses combination of filtration, ultraviolet radiation, and ozone to break down most of your normal organic things, right? Stuff you don't want to drink, but, the regular stuff, your hydrocarbons and things like that. You don't want to drink gasoline. Well, that stuff's broken down. But PFAS are different. They don't break down in those treatment systems. You've got to deal with them differently. And that's why you need the granular activated carbon or reverse osmosis, which is what Brunswick County is using. And so we're having to pay that much more extra to clean up the PFAS pollution that comes from Chemours.
And that's on us now. That's the part that's...
Right now, yeah, it's coming out of our pockets. And, am I happy about no, I'm not. And I don't think anybody among your listeners ought to be happy about that. This is not the cost of having Teflon pots, okay, or Gore-Tex. This is a business that's cheating by foisting upon the public, without their knowledge or consent, the cost of producing their products. That's just wrong. That's a corruption of any sense of a free market economy. In a free market economy, the cost of doing business includes the cost of cleaning up the mess you make.
Like
right?
a 5-year-old knows.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to
Exactly.
that only because this is an education that just we can't seem to learn from.
It's a clever form of cheating to make money. Make a mess, make somebody else pay for cleaning it up, or just walk away and make the taxpayers pay for it.
And start a new company specializing in cleanup.
Right. Yeah. And charge for that too. Yeah. Only after you found out, you've got poison in your drinking water. Gee, we can
Wonder how
help you
that
with
happened.
that. Yeah.
Oh, look,
I
we
would
just
argue.
developed this new RO system.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we'll sell it to you.
And because we like you, we're going to give you a discount.
Right. There you go. And, of course, who gets left behind? The folks who can't afford to pay for all that, right? And so you're poisoning people who can't afford to pay to clean up. Yeah, right. And so what happens with poisoned people? They get sick, right? And so who pays the health care costs for poor people? Well, Medicaid, that would be
everybody
the
else.
Taxpayers. Yeah. So, you bitch about your taxes. Well, part of your tax money is being used to pay for the damage done by some private company, right? There's a bill that our congressman has either introduced into the House of Representatives. This is David Rouser, or he's at least co-sponsored it. I think he actually introduced it. And it would call for federal money to pay for these cleanups. Well, thanks, Dave.
Okay, yeah, that's, pass the buck along.
I mean, I would benefit from that as a resident of this poisoned watershed, but it's coming out of my tax dollars. And it's coming
the victims
out of
are still
everyone
paying
else's
for the
tax
crime.
dollars. Right. And the folks who should pay for this, that is, the shareholders in the company that did this, are not being charged for it. They've got their dividends and their stock prices, and they get to walk away without paying what I think is their proper bill for cleaning up their mess. So, laying stuff off on the federal taxpayers is absolutely a last resort. That's what Superfund is about. Speaking of that, I saw on TV just last night about Camp Lejeune and the water pollution there. This is a horrible story. It's been in the news on and off. Turns out that the water supply system on Camp Lejeune is a series of wells, and those wells were contaminated with a series of organic compounds, including trichloroethylene or trike and perchloroethylene, perc, and a bunch of others like that. They're chlorinated hydrocarbons. They're known carcinogens. They're used in degreasing engine parts, cleaning engines from everything from tanks to helicopters and jets. They're also used in dry cleaning. And those chemicals were dumped on the ground at Camp Lejeune and nearby, starting back in the 1950s. And, of course, they got into the groundwater. And that means they got into the wells, the drinking water supply for the Marines who were based there and their families. The Marine Corps learned about this in the middle 1980s. They didn't take those wells offline. A matter of fact, they learned about it earlier than that. I have a very good buddy who was involved way back in this. They found out about this, I think, maybe as early as 1979. I could be wrong about that, but way long time ago, right? They didn't take those contaminated wells offline for over a decade. In the meantime, the Marines and their families were drinking poisoned water loaded with carcinogens, and the Marine Corps knew it, and they didn't stop it. They finally stopped, but only after they'd exposed no less than 250,000 people. And those compounds were known to cause cancer. The poster child, quite literally and very unfortunately for all of this, is a little girl named Janie Ensminger. Her father, forget his first, Jerry Ensminger, was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, served a couple decades or more. I met him, 15 years ago, at an event where this issue was discussed. I saw him on TV last night. His daughter Janie died of leukemia at age 9 because of that contaminated water. They found all kinds of cancers associated with this poisoned water. Men with breast cancer. If you think about that for a bit, that's really odd. But there were men, Marines, who got breast cancer from drinking this water. I mean, it's terrible. And there's a long list of known health effects, various cancers and other serious health problems that now are known to be associated with that poison water. The news story last night was that there is a bill in Congress which appears likely to pass that would compensate those folks for all the harms done. And here we are in the year 2022, and this problem dates back over 40 years. In the meantime, a fair number of those folks have died. An awful lot of people have been made ill and maybe have survived, but they've had serious health problems. And at least 250,000 were exposed to this. And the Marine Corps denied and stonewalled and refused to do anything about it for decades. You know, how's that for Semper Fi?
Well, their brothers are...
You know,
yeah, that's...
Semper Fi means always faithful. Yeah, well, except when we're poisoning you and we don't want you to know about it. Pardon my sarcasm, but, you know, loyalty to me goes both ways. The Marines owe their loyalty to their country and to the Corps. The Corps should owe its loyalty to its Marines and their families.
And
so, just my opinion, but I think most folks would agree with me on that.
It almost seems like a logical flow, kind of like the way a river flows from being pure to being Chemours to being Wilmington.
Yeah, and you know we're dependent on what happens upstream of us,
politically and physically.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Like the permitting, apparently there was some issues with the permitting, which is what prevented the grand jury. Apparently there was a timing issue between when DEQ had generated or permitted what Chemours was doing and then didn't do anything about it to correct the permitting, so they still technically had a permit.
They had a discharge permit, and you got to burrow into the details. You know, that's where everything happens.
And I think that's what the grand jury didn't do.
Yeah, and you really have to understand the details of the permitting. The Clean Water Act requires a discharge permit for any pipe carrying anything into waters of the state. And the Cape Fear River is waters of the state, trust me.
Yeah.
So when Chemours was discharging, or DuPont back when was discharging, they had to have a permit. Well, they had a permit. Well, the permit specifies what you're going to put in, how much of it, And if it, is on a list of toxic things and whatnot, there are limits. And the limits are concentration and load-based concentrations, how much per unit volume. Load is the total amount of stuff going in. The idea is that you are not going to degrade the water quality of the receiving body of water below its use standards. Again, there's a lot of jargon that gets thrown in here, but basically the water coming out of your pipe has to be safe for whatever the designated uses would be. Now, in the case of a drinking water supply, there is a presumption that you've got a water treatment plant and so forth. And all that's fine and dandy. The important factor in a permit is there's a good faith expectation. Now, again, good faith expectation that you are going to disclose everything that's in your discharge. So if I run a pipe out of my swimming pool into a stream and I need a permit to do that, which I would if I ran a pipe, there's a good faith assumption that it's swimming pool water and not my used oil from my oil change business, right? So, yeah, I'm just making that up. I don't change oil for money. I have others do it. But suppose I did. The point is that when you create a discharge, you're supposed to tell, and again, good faith expectation, everything that's in that discharge. Now, some things will be present in trivial amounts. Okay. So the way the rules are written, they set up several criteria. One is, do you have reason to believe that the substance you're discharging is toxic?
That's a rather general question.
It is. It is. And whether it's on a list of things or not, it's a question of, do you have reason to believe it's toxic? I mean, you're the discharger. You made the stuff. You should know that. That's your responsibility. So if you know that something is toxic, the next criterion is how much, what concentration is going in. And EPA and Clean Water Act layout, again, I don't want to get too far down the technical road. I do know the technical specs. If you are sure it's toxic, have reason to believe it is, then there's a certain limit, 100 micrograms per liter. That's a whole lot more than parts per trillion, by the way.
Wow.
That's 100 parts per million, or parts per billion, excuse me. If you suspect it might be toxic, but you're not sure, your limit's 500. Okay? So in this particular case...
So you can be a little dishonest in a way and get away with a greater... Because these aren't like, what is the scientific... show me a mass spec reading.
Right.
This is all subjective almost.
There's an element of discretion involved. And the point of that is you're supposed to disclose what you're doing and seek guidance so that you're doing it properly. And it's a good faith expectation. In other words, we're going to trust you to tell us the truth.
Whoops.
Okay. Yeah.
And we're still continuing to extend trust to them, like the well testings. It's insanity.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we're going to trust them.
At some point, when do we take the matches away from the firebug?
That can happen. If it's egregious enough, yeah. The Clean Water Act and the enforcement provisions allow us to do everything up to and including shutting them down if they're really awful. Now, shutting them down means, of course, laying off a whole bunch of people and levying fines and putting people in jail and so forth and so on. So it's a lot of hassle, and it's rarely used.
Not unwarranted, however.
No, there are times. I mean, frankly, I'd carry a much heavier stick. That's just me, though. I don't like it when people lie to me. And I don't like it when they're not honest.
And then get rewarded $9 million a year.
Disclosing. Yeah, right. And they get paid to cheat. And DuPont and Chemours both cheated. I mean, I'll just say it flat out. They cheated. They knew what they were putting in the river. They certainly were able to measure it. And they did notify the state, but they were very fuzzy about it. And they didn't really follow the letter of the law, in my view. And so, you know, they've been getting away with this until the public became aware of it. You know, it was a newspaper story, a headline, that finally got this situation brought to light and, you know, on the way to being fixed, we hope, 5 years down the road. I mean, that's shameful. You know, the state let it happen. DuPont cheated. They were dishonest. Chemours maintained that same behavior until they got caught. You know,
and now they're mad.
It goes on and on like that. Yeah, and now they're trying to persuade us, 99% is good enough. No, the technology is there on the table. We have the technology. You know, it's not a matter of coming up with some new techniques or anything.
We're not inventing warp drive.
Up. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're not traveling, interstellar space here. You know, there's nothing magical about it. The technology exists. They know what can be done, and they don't want to pay for it. And, you know, our aim is to force them to clean that stuff up to the proper standard, which is, you know, down on those single-digit parts per trillion. We can do that. They can do that. Between reverse osmosis and granular activated carbon, the technologies exist to do that. And they just have to pay for it, which they don't want to do. So, you know, we're being blitzed with a campaign of PR by the company, and, you know, they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes again. They're not being honest about what they really want to do.
And I tell you what, I would pick State Farm over these guys for the slogan. Because if you're going to be a good neighbor, please don't be there. Just...
Yeah, that's not being a good neighbor. That's poisoning our water supply for profit and trying to get away with keeping on doing it and making us pay to clean it up. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I don't need a neighbor like that. No one does.
No, we need neighbors like the Cape Fear,
right?
Cape Fear Riverwatch.
Yeah, and while I'm at it, another item just out in the news is that EPA has issued new guidelines for the levels of PFAS compounds that are safe for drinking water, and they came out with guidelines, I think, for 4 compounds, PFOA and PFOS, which are what we call legacy compounds, in that they're no longer produced. PFOA, PFOA, has not been produced up at Fayetteville Works since about 2013. They started producing it there in 2002, and it's in their groundwater. They notified the state in 2002, 2003 that it was there in their groundwater. Nothing happened. But that's no longer produced. It's still there. And by the way, blood testing for Wilmington residents has shown a lot of that stuff in our blood.
Wow.
Thank you very much. PFOS
so poisoning their groundwater, poisoning our groundwater.
Yeah, right. Our blood. PFOS was used in firefighting foams. It's no longer used for that. That shows up in our bloodstream. The new standards for PFOA and PFOS announced by EPA, and they're I think they're still draft guidelines, are 100th or even 1/10,000th or so of a part per trillion for those compounds.
Ooh.